Good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this in-person policy dialogue that is dedicated to Georgia. And I'm also very happy that this policy dialogue is organized under the Enlargement Task Force of the European Policy Center that we have launched a few days ago, 10 days ago here at the EPC with the Director General of the engineer with Koopman. And this project, the Task Force on EU enlargement, aims to propose solutions and the ideas regarding EU's enlargement and understand and analyze the implications of EU's enlargement on institutional architecture, on policies, and of course, we will also propose the strategy paper that will outline the key ways and the key directions that we think that Union has to take into before it enlarges. But of course, this project, you will hear also more about the project in the upcoming days and months. And also, I would like to ask you to check our website, and there you also will find the information about the task force, its projects, its main publications, and also the podcast that we have launched today. And I'm very happy that this morning also we had the possibility to launch the podcast where we discussed the enlargement package and the steps after the package that we are all waiting for. That is, of course, as you know, the European Council summit that is to be held in December 14th and 15th. But now, regarding the event itself, I'm very happy that today I'm joined by an excellent panelists, the speakers. So I'm very happy, and I will, of course, gladly introduce them in a while. But before, I would like to also share with you some introductory remarks about the event, about Georgia, about our path, and what is the event about. Of course, as you know, Georgia is now a part of EU's enlargement package. It's the first time that the European Commission has reported under its enlargement package about the 10 countries, right? So Georgia was one of them. Of course, we know that on Turkey, we have not yet had the comprehensive analysis and report. Now we have, but not in the package, yes. But however, of course, Georgia is now part of the enlargement package, and this is due to the fact that, of course, our country, Georgia, was received the EU membership perspective in 2022. And of course, this perspective was acknowledged by the Council, and now under the European Commission's much anticipated enlargement package that was hailed as a historic package by HRVP Joseph Borrell. And of course, as you know, also von der Leyen, the European Commission President herself, also insists that this package answers to the call of history. This package indeed recommends granting Georgia a candidate status, of course, on conditions that 9 steps are fulfilled. And today we will also touch upon about these steps as well. But I also would like to perhaps mention that the enlargement package itself strives to embody the essential characteristics to be recognized as Commission's most substantial endeavor to transcend its rhetorical commitment to its enlargement promise. And the package, of course, places significant emphasis on the EU's Eastern Trio. I also would like perhaps at some point to discuss about the Eastern Trio as such, whether this initiative is back and what to expect from that front. And of course, this big momentum that we are facing here when it comes to this EU's enlargement is very much evident in the EU's Commission's assessment, where it also expresses the readiness to open the accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova. So indeed, the Commission's enlargement package showcases its geopolitical ambition through its innovative features as well, such as focus on compliance with the common and foreign security policy. This is a new feature that we have seen in the package itself, and the explicit requirement also for EU aspirants to actively counter the foreign information manipulation. So this is also the second element that is rather new in the EU enlargement package, and these criteria indeed demonstrate a clear and strategic language in the EU's external relations, signaling a more assertive and proactive EU foreign policy. Of course, nevertheless, despite this enlargement momentum that is here with us, incorporating both Eastern Trio and the Western Balkan countries into unified framework, uncovers some inherent complexities of this policy that, of course, is very much intertwined and connected with the domestic political factors. And without advancing on the reform agenda domestically, even in this high momentum era on EU enlargement policy, it will be difficult, even not impossible, to start the accession process. And therefore, also, this event is dedicated to understanding also these internal factors, and of course, to understand the key homework for Georgia on the one hand, but of course, as the main focus, I think, should be and will be to understand and to discuss what is this status, what does it mean for Georgia, and how it can help Georgia to boost and to strengthen its reform momentum. So therefore, I'm very happy to open today's event and introduce our speakers with us. So I'm very happy that today we are joined by Ms. Shorena Lortkipanidze, who is board member of Civil Council of Defense and Security. Thank you so much, Shorena, for your presence with us. I would like to introduce Mr. Marcel Röthig, who is regional director of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung South Caucasus. And last but definitely not the least, Amanda Paul, our colleague, a senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center, and of course, very much renowned member of the task force on EU enlargement task force within the EPC itself. So during today's event, we will mainly discuss the implications. So what are the implications of this decision or assessment? Decision is not yet there, so we are waiting for the final green light by the European Council in a few weeks. But the assessment itself, so what are the implications of this assessment on Georgia's reform agenda? Could it potentially stabilize the highly polarized political landscape that we have in Georgia? And also discuss the role of the civil society and how the civil society can further advance and strengthen the resilience of our country to make sure that we can continue our integration towards the EU. This event is being recorded, so it will also be available afterwards for your information and further consultation, but also for others who will not be able to join. And as you know, this week is a Strasbourg week, so lots of members of the, not everybody actually is in Strasbourg, all the MEPs, and therefore we also received the request to record this event so that also they have an access to that, other colleagues and actors in Brussels. So let's start our discussion, but before starting, I would like to also remind and thank once again our audience for being with us today and ask you also to prepare your questions. So the discussion will be very much interactive. So prepare your questions and we will definitely try to answer. I will incorporate your questions during the discussion process. I would like to start our discussion by asking Shorena perhaps to deliver your opening remarks and perhaps share with us your key takeaways from the enlargement package, but to also explain from your perspective what this could mean for Georgia, this decision assessment from the Commission and potential decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teona, indeed, for inviting, for giving us this opportunity. And it's an honor for me to be with you today. So first of all, I would like to say that today is 20th years anniversary of Rose Revolution. And 20 years passed, and we have this opportunity now. So many things have happened during these 20 years, so many ups and downs, and we experienced war. And finally, last year, we got this promise or pledge or support from European Union that Georgia might get candidacy status, and now we have this recommendation, which is great. That was very big relief for our society, for civil society, for politics itself, and we can speak about this decision. I mean, these processes which are taking place now. They have, I think, different dimensions. There are different perspectives, different layers of analysis. What we need. need. First of all, and that was the main condition actually, and from in the 12th point, 12th conditions itself, the polarization is one of the main problem for Georgia. I think it stays there. So we were hoping that this recommendation will actually give some impetus to the depolarizing situation, a little bit decreasing the political tension, but seems that now it's kind of it's calm. But I think that this is the main problem for Georgia, that a pluralistic political dialogue is not taking place. And actually, we are so much waiting for that dialogue to start, or that kind of reset of Georgian politics will happen. And we hope, and civil society hopes, that the status in December will serve really for this kind of reset of Georgian politics, because I think that even with this new condition and new steps which we are recommended and Georgia is recommended and has to follow and to accomplish. The main thing is political will and political motivation of ruling party, and I think other political parties as well, to engage in dialogue and actually to think and to work together. I think what we need and what this decision, which will be official, I hope very much in December, that so if we are able with civil society's participation and maybe leadership even to build this platform of dialogue among very diverse views in the society. So this is very important. Another important task, I think, for us now is to guarantee sustainability of institutional reforms, which has been taking place actually for so many years, and we still are struggling with certain in different sectors, different spheres. My organization, we are working for a long time on security and defense sector reforms, and we see that this is the sector, this is the field where Georgia needs more democracy, more openness, more transparency, more accountability. And I think this is a very thick kind of line where our democracy goes actually. So, and the last developments, all these different scandals, discussions on surveillance, on many other issues, state security service, or many other things. And actually in 9 steps, we see that intelligence and security oversight is one of the main conditions. And so that's so important. What can be added to that is that parliamentary oversight. So we see that parliament is absolutely, I mean, it's so weak. And we need a stronger parliament. And we are very much hoping that the next year's election will bring us more diverse, more powerful, and more the parliament which is more directed on dialogue. And we will see a little bit, at least, some changes in political kind of landscape. And that's very important. And the last thing, and maybe there are some other questions, I would say that we need, and this perspective is so important to ensure diversity, inclusion, inclusivity of political processes, which we also very much lacking and very much looking forward to achieve. So I think these are the key issues, or with which I wanted to start talking about the importance of this process for Georgia's democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Shorena, for elaborating and reflecting on these important topics that you have also named, particularly you mentioned also the parliamentary oversight, but more transparency in the security defense systems. Before I ask the opening question to Marcel, I would like to perhaps a quick follow-up question there, Shorena, if I may, because here we also discuss a lot in Brussels about this combination of geopolitical imperative, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the merit-based principle in the enlargement process. And then we also hear lots of voices that in some cases, perhaps some countries deserved to get the positive signal from the Commission, but in some cases, perhaps of Georgia, was a bit less, let's say, accent on the merit-based, and it was more geopolitical impetus because of the obvious reasons. So from your perspective and your observations and looking into these 9 steps that we have now on also the 12 recommendations that are still, some of them are there, many of them are there to be fulfilled. Do you think that Georgia deserves to get this status in? So what would be your answer to the skeptics here in Brussels who think that's no, let's wait and so on?
Yes, thank you for this question, but I will a little bit reformulate it and not speak about deserving, but we need that European Union helped Georgia to become better. So, I mean, this is my answer to that. Why? Because there is no alternative to alliances, partnerships. And I think that Georgia needs desperately to be officially be closer to European Union, to integrate and that's so important to be on that path. But I think that a democratic Georgia is kind of hope and assets for European Union. So I think this is very much reciprocal, but of course, Georgia needs to become better. And if there is any chance that European Union can support Georgia to become better, and this is very difficult process. It's, as I said in the beginning, there are so many different layers. There is geopolitics that is there. Who is Georgia's neighbor in the north? So, and geography matters, of course. So you can't do anything with geography. This is part of this cultural, structural conflict, or what we can call it. But there is no alternative partnerships, alliances. There is no alternative to shared values. And I think that Georgia, with these 20 years and before that as well, because these aspirations to be a part of bigger European, Euro-Atlantic space and community, that was Georgia's aspiration from the beginning, from the first days of its independence. So, and I think that Georgia can be helpful, supportive, can contribute to European security, and we need to be better, and we need to overcome all those geography, and many other, and this polarization and many others, undemocratic trends time to time, with the support of our friends. So that would be my answer to your question, Teona. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Shorena. Dear Marcel, now I would like to hear from you. We would like to hear from your perspective. You are leading very interesting times, the office back in Georgia, but also in the South Caucasus. And from your opinion and from your rich experience, so how would you assess the implications of potential candidates of Georgia on domestic politics, but also on foreign affairs, but also for the upcoming elections that Georgia will have it next year, 2024? What would be your take on that?
Yeah, thank you so much also on our behalf for your warm hospitality and for your whole team setting this up, and ultimately bringing Georgia back on the agenda. I'm in particular happy first and foremost that we are here on a positive note. Just imagine we would not have the recommendation for the candidate status, and then we would be here. We would talk in a very different way, and I don't even want to imagine how the situation in Tbilisi would be like, because people would be certainly disappointed, simply, and taking into account that we are already now in the pre-election times, although it's still almost a year to go. I don't want to imagine how the moods in Tbilisi would be these days. So thanks God we finally have the candidacy status. It took a year. We lost a year, mainly from my point of view, because I consider it a big mistake to divide Georgia from Ukraine and Moldova on this path. But that has now been corrected. We are back on track. And from the signals that I see in Tbilisi, the mood is positive, and the government is positive, of course, certainly, but also they raised certain expectations that we might have joint working groups on the 9 points between the government, the ruling party, and civil society, parliamentary opposition. So that's good, because through all the year, I'm now in Georgia based for 1 year, but through all the year, I had the feeling that the one topic that unites everybody is the European perspective of Georgia. That is the only topic that is beyond any polarization. And we should do our utmost not to make the European future of Georgia a subject of the polarization. Vice versa, it's very important to keep that out separately, because I believe that in the end of the day, the European perspective of Georgia is something that will help us to finally overcome the polarization, because all the actors have to put one in the same string to make it happen. So where we are right now, as I said, the real work will only start, 9 points to fulfill. I hoped actually that the 9 points would have been more concrete. In some of the aspects, they were again a little bit unconcrete. The more concrete, the better and the easier it is to fulfill them. Or at the end of the day, when the recommendation is very unconcrete, then both sides can say different things. One side can say we fulfilled it, another side said no, we didn't. And that's exactly how it should not be. The elections, that's going to be a decisive moment for Georgia next year if the elections happen in a free, in a fair way, as they used to be, and without any clashes, protests whatsoever. We all hope that this is not going to happen, and let Georgians decide about the future. And of course, it's going to be more difficult to implement the 9 points when you have the election campaign ongoing. So I would, at the same time, always argue don't expect too much, especially in the pre-election time when it comes on fulfilling. But nevertheless, I hope, since especially the point of free and fair elections is one of the 9 points, that this would also help us so that the elections will happen in a fair and good way, so that later on, next year, when the next assessment is going to happen, that we can once again say that Georgia is a front runner, and that together with Ukraine and Moldova, we will proceed to the next level, to the actual negotiations. And then let's see what the future brings. But looking back those 20 years, once again, I mean, this morning I was checking up a bit the history of Georgia and talking to people who have been working in Georgia 20 years ago. Actually, in the morning, I spoke to an Austrian journalist, and he told me he was in Georgia exactly 20 years ago. And when he drove by car from Gori to Tbilisi, he was stopped by police twice asking for a bribe. This is something that nowadays would not happen. And this is unimaginable for Georgia today, thanks God. And Georgia made tremendous efforts and big steps forward. And it took just 20 years, and now we have finally the EU membership perspective. Who had ever thought that we would be there? Me personally, even 2 years ago, I could not imagine having the candidacy status for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Being a German, I even less could imagine so that the German government would be so easygoing when it comes to enlarging the European Union with the Eastern European neighbors. It happened so. Of course, nobody wanted the war to happen in between all of that, but it's a watershed moment for the whole European politics and for Germany and especially. And here we are, and finally we can not only dream about the membership, but we can work about it. And this is something that hopefully unites our societies and hopefully also unites the European Union, because there's a lot of homework to be done on that side as well. But it's tasks for the future generations of all of us. And so that at some point of time, we can say finally Europe is completed and Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova become the full-fledged members.
Thank you so much for this forward-looking and positive messages. But of course, these messages are not only positive, but also, of course, we know that there are challenges when it comes to Georgia's internal politics, and there is homework to be done. But yes, as you mentioned, few years, 2 years ago, it would have been unimaginable to think about not even about the membership, but about the membership prospects, right? So this Eastern Partnership policy that we had and we still have was very clearly, let's say, not mentioning this perspective at all. So it was only bilateral relations and some, of course, funding programs and so on. But now we have a new page when it comes to Georgia's EU relations prospects and membership prospects. But before I will ask my dear colleague Amanda to intervene, perhaps a follow-up question, because you also mentioned that a year was lost when it comes to the candidacy status or the recommendation of the. So how would you explain this lost, let's say, time? Whose side was, let's say, whom to blame, let's say, for that?
I don't know. Well, actually, I was very much fond of the idea of having the associated trio, because it showed that all three are on the same page. They can learn from each other, they can exchange with each other, no matter who is the current frontrunner, knowing, of course, Georgia was the frontrunner for the longest time, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's the frontrunner as long as you're together reaching the ultimate aim. But the whole year we were discussing in Georgia about the 12 points and will there be candidacy and will there be not. At the end of the year, let's be honest, when it comes to actually fulfilling, one side says Georgia fulfilled all the points or almost fulfilled all the points. Another side said Georgia fulfilled only 2.5 maximum out of these points. And the points themselves, to some way, were so unconcrete that you could basically have used the same recommendations for Ukraine and Moldova: de-oligarchization, anti-corruption. It plays a similar role in Moldova and Ukraine. So why Georgia had to make the extra round here, knowing that at the end of the year, even with a probably much lower track and fulfillment of these 12 points, Georgia would get the candidacy status, because ultimately politics overwhelm the situation in this moment, and geopolitics in particular. So it was a lost year, but nevertheless, now we are back on track, and that's what counts at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. And dear Amanda, now we are also very much looking forward to hearing from your perspective, especially perhaps when it comes to the security situation in the region, and how the enlargement process and this perspective and this membership prospects can help the region to stabilize. So what would be your remarks in this respect? Is EU becoming a security actor in the South Caucasus? Can it be?
No. That would be the brief answer for the moment. No, thank you, Teona. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel. I mean, when we look at the security situation in the South Caucasus, it's very bad, quite honestly. Internal and external security threats. But that said, I don't think the current security situation should impact Georgia to a large degree, hopefully, in terms of pushing ahead with reform. They should be able to do most of these reforms and hopefully have the political will to actually do them. Obviously, the exception to that is the issue of polarization, because this risks internal destabilization. So this should be a priority. The other area is on CSDP. I mean, the EU has asked Georgia to align more with EU foreign policy and security policy. I think to some degree they should be able to do this, but expecting Georgia to fully align, to be honest, at this point, is very unrealistic, simply because of the external security threats. I think sometimes people in the EU don't still properly understand regional dynamics. I mean, it's very black and white sometimes. You do it or you don't do it. And there's not always a real understanding of what the implications can be of perhaps going slightly too far, because we should never forget the fact that Russian tanks are 40 kilometers away from Tbilisi. And despite the fact that Russia is very bogged down in Ukraine, you simply cannot dismiss the possibility that they could potentially come again into Georgia if they feel like it, if the Georgians take a step which they consider to be so awful, they need to push back against it. But as I said, this shouldn't be an excuse for Georgia not cracking on with reforms and doing what it can to meet all of the priorities that the EU has laid down, including, you know, putting to bed once and for all this issue of helping Russia circumvent sanctions. I mean, we hear from different sources that this is still happening or it's not happening, depending on who you speak to. As far as I know, there has been some significant progress in this area, but there's still more that can be done to really prove 100% that Georgia is not doing this. And of course, it would be extremely helpful if none of the leadership of the Georgian government, the Prime Minister and others, will ever again make any sort of strange statement that is seen as being pro-Russian. Because, I mean, half of the problem the EU has had with Georgia has been about narrative. It's been about communication and some of the things that have been said. So I think this is a very important moment for both sides, because yes, in theory, Georgia has a candidate country status. We still have to wait till the decision in December. But after that, it shouldn't be an issue of sitting back and saying, look, we've got it. We don't need to do very much. I mean, there needs to be concrete action, and it needs to be done very quickly. And I think this would be important for the security and stability of the region. I see the candidate country status as helping to solidify the EU's position in the region, which remains actually quite, I'm trying to think of the right word in English, not solid. I mean, it's not fully anchored to the South Caucasus in a way that I would like it to be. Having Georgia as a candidate country will significantly increase the anchorage that the EU has in the South Caucasus. It will also strengthen the EU's or the Europeanization of the Black Sea, because it will take the coastline. This is one thing. The thing that worries me more is what's going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan and these regional dynamics, because it looks the situation on the ground doesn't look great. I mean, as we know, there was the 2020 war, and since that, this year, we've had the second sort of offensive from Azerbaijan, where they liberated the rest of their territory, but we're now in a very strange situation where let's say the peace talks are stalled. The previous EU-led negotiations, there hasn't been a meeting for at least a couple of months. So we're again at a watershed moment where it's very important to get Azerbaijan and Armenia back to the table for talks and to reach a peace agreement between the two. This is what will bring real security and stability to the South Caucasus region. As long as this doesn't happen, there is a risk of increased tensions, particularly initiated from the side of Azerbaijan. At the moment, we're facing the possibility where they could potentially invade Armenia, the Sumy region, the so-called Zangezur corridor, to achieve strategic objectives. And this is extremely detrimental. The other issue here that's very important, which is also linked to Georgia, is I think that the EU will reach out and further strengthen political and economic ties with Armenia. This is actually crucial for security and stability in the region, because just having Georgia there as a candidate is not enough. They need to double down also on Armenia, and to the extent they can in Azerbaijan. And we've seen some moves in that direction. I mean, there's been some high-level visits of Armenians here. The EU has now strengthened or agreed to strengthen its CFSP mission, the monitoring mission in Armenia. This is important, but there's more that can be done in this direction. But we're not here today to talk about Armenia, but I think all of these things actually work together. But the most important thing to do now is that the EU is actually properly committed to Georgia, because I still have actually question mark in my mind. I mean, I know they've said they have the candidate country status, but at the end of the day, this is still a slogan. It needs to be met with concrete actions, and it needs to have the real commitment from 27 member states. And there are still some question marks from some member states, or I have question marks in my mind, how committed they actually are to enlargement in the first place. So it takes two to row a boat. So we need to see the equal commitment from both Georgia, first and foremost, but also from the EU in terms of taking this relationship forward. And my very last point, coming back to the initial question, I do think, unfortunately, that the occupied territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia can potentially be a stumbling block to Georgia's eventual membership of the EU. I mean, there are options to get around that, the same options that were actually flagged when Georgia's process towards NATO accession was on the table. But there needs to be some new thinking over how we as the EU or other external actors can find new formats or ways to start talking about South Ossetia and Abkhazia, rather than telling the Georgians, oh, this, you've lost Ossetia, or maybe we can do something with Abkhazia or something like that. This is not the solution. And that needs to start happening now, not in 10 years down the road, because we can be sure that Russia will use these territories even more than it does to destabilize or to disrail Georgia's accession process. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Amanda. Very interesting points. I do have a follow-up question, but before, I think Marcel also would like to comment briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, for this very important, taking Armenia here into account. Moreover, I would highlight that in the recent months in Armenia, very often it has been voiced that the European perspective for Georgia has a meaning for Armenia as well. They very much look what is happening around Georgia, and Georgia, so to say, is the key. And when Georgia is successful in that way, it has a meaning for Armenia as well. Because, I mean, the dependencies on Russia are obvious, and they are so much more than they have ever been in Ukraine or in Georgia. But nevertheless, if we speak about the long term, I would not exclude that a Georgian membership perspective would step by step also influence Armenian decision making. And let's be honest, for 30 years, Karabakh was the, well, so to say, the political vision of Armenia, and that's over. And countries like Ukraine, like Georgia, had the European future as something that was the political vision for the country, which Armenia never had. So if Karabakh is not the vision anymore, what else than the European future of Armenia can be that vision? Regarding South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and finding ways to accept Georgia as a member to EU and NATO, taking into account that the Georgian government is not in fully control of its territories. I don't think we have to invent the wheel from new, but just look at our own history. Germany was taken into NATO, although Germany did not control, in a way, its own territory, and everyone knew that the war would break out, the Third World War could break out any moment just in the middle of Germany. So if the West is brave in a way, we could also say that, of course, we accept Georgia as a NATO member, not taking into account that Georgia is not in control of its own full territory. So this should not hinder us from any enlargement. Vice versa, if we speak about containing Russia in a way, and if we come back to the logics of the 1950s, then even more so, it's important that Georgia is becoming a NATO member at the end of the day as well. But speaking about the EU, also people in Abkhazia and in South Ossetia probably very much follow and what's happening with the EU perspective, and if Georgia is developing in a good way, and if Georgia has something to offer, better life standards, freedom, perspectives for young people, and this is only realistic through the European perspective, then in the long term, I'm pretty sure it's also influencing people's mindset in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It took Germany also centuries to reunite, but at the end of the day, it happened in a peaceful way. Nobody ever thought in summer 1989 that it would be possible, but at the end of the day, it happened and nobody got killed. So never say never. Sometimes history is making its own things that none of us would ever expect.
Thank you so much. Actually, that's very important indeed, Marcel, that you highlighted again this point about the conflicts and the security situation in the countries, because it doesn't only apply to Georgia, but also in Moldova we have Transnistria, but also in Ukraine the war is going, and there are reflections what will be the future of how Ukraine will also get into the EU when we look into the ongoing situation there. So therefore, this question is very much pertinent. I also received a lot of questions on that. So how to imagine countries joining with actual frozen conflicts there. So I would like to ask this to all the panelists also here. What will be your solution? Shorena, perhaps you want to come in, and maybe Amanda, you want to respond to Marcel's proposal that you can go ahead with this, let's say, countries with the frozen conflicts joining and no need to really invent a new wheel in this respect. Shorena, what would be your take on that? And you are a specialist in the conflict resolution, and it's important to hear your opinion.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that the problem again, I agree, Amanda, absolutely with you, that the problem is again narrative. And of course, the frozen conflicts, this is a great problem. It needs its own healing approach, instruments, but overall in the bigger picture of politics, the problem here is again the narrative and story, maybe officially told, or for what we are ready, Georgians. I mean, are we ready for that? Are we ready for 9 points to be implemented? This is all about political will and about self-presentation, actually. So, and what I wanted to say that I'm very hopeful about Armenia. And I would like to say that I think this conflict and this war somehow liberated and emancipated Armenia. And you can see all the political statements by Prime Minister. And actually, I was on Paris conference when he congratulated Georgia with UN's this recommendation, candidacy status, and also saying things what Marcel already said. So I think that for many years, for Georgia, this vision of Georgian future was Euro-Atlantic integration. So and that was so important for Georgia. And now yes, that's today. My concern and my feeling is that somehow there is a kind of attempt of reconstructing this vision somehow. On the one hand, yes, maybe we need to move forward with our understanding of the world, the place Georgia has in this bigger world. But on the other hand, it's a little bit concerning maybe. Is it right time for Georgia to reconstruct its mission and speaking things like we should enter the European Union on 2 feet and things like that? I don't know. I mean, the narrative is everywhere, the problem. It's problem with the sanctions policies, adherence to European foreign and security policy statements, and everywhere. Narrative is a problem everywhere. And for me, it's also very difficult to understand what is, not understand, but what are why that happens, because it's so easy to change things which is under your control. So when you know that something is harmful, some statements are harmful, you can always change them. So I mean, this is something very difficult and very important to understand what is the dynamics behind what's happening here. So as for in this wider South Caucasus kind of regional issues, I would say that Georgia tried tries to balance somehow, and that our neighbors are fine with Georgia's position. But Georgia could also play maybe in future more stronger role actually as peacemaker, as mediator. Why not? But on the other hand, you should have your own vision for conflict resolution, for what is peace for us, how we envision. Some people say that it's too early when there is war in Ukraine, there is Russia so aggressive. Is it time for these discussions? I mean, this is another question, but I'm for those who I think we should bear in mind all the time these conflicts and our approaches. And I was just a few weeks ago, I was in Zugdidi, and then I went to Röthig village, which is the last village controlled by Georgian government. And actually I was led and I crossed the bridge and get to Abkhazian checkpoints. I crossed the bridge, and that was very emotional. All this surrealistical situation that you can't go beyond checkpoints, and there is something invisible and visible as well. Of course, walls, metal walls, you can't go there. So, I mean, these are the walls which were constructed after the Soviet Union. I mean, and we need all together. It's not only Georgia. Georgia cannot deal with that. This is something we all think about, because the world and what's going on in international scene, what's going on Middle East, Ukraine, this is a matter of all our concern and care. So I think that we should together look for some solutions. That's why our integration, us to be parts of something bigger is so important, because it gives us more stimulus. So, and there are no answers, but we have to ask questions and we have to reflect on those questions.
Thank you so much, dear Shorena. I also would like now to open the floor for your questions. And then I also have afterwards a question related to China, but this will come. So let's start, Bidina.
My name is Bidzina. I'm Deputy Head of Mission of Georgia to the EU. Thank you, first of all, for inviting, and thank you to the EPC for thinking about Georgia and for organizing this today. I just make a few comments on very excellent points you all made, but it just gave me some ideas, and I just want to share them with you. First thing, Teona, you said, it's something I repeat, in fact, quite often. You said whether the decision was geopolitical or whether Georgia deserved it or didn't deserve it, and it was just geopolitical. Well, whether it was a geopolitical or merit-based decision, basically, I think it's something we need to debunk, and I think it's a vain debate at all. Any decision European Council, the Council of Ministers take is a political decision. There is no other kind of decision that are being taken by ministers. So of course, this decision is also a political decision. Was it not a political decision when Greece became a member of the European Union? Well, it was, or the UK. If you knew how this happened, it was very much a political decision of the Frenchmen at the time. Yeah, political decision. So all the decisions, especially on enlargement, are political decisions. But these decisions need to be based on the merit, and the merit sometimes is also misinterpreted. What we mean by the merit, some people speak about the 12th century Georgia in Georgia, but the merit is the way the countries fulfill the commitments they take in the process. So when it comes to Georgia, I think we've done a lot, and I think our efforts in this direction did not start last year in June. This started 20 years ago, at least, because some people say it's 25, 30, but okay, 20 is a safe number to say. So we've been doing this for 20 years. We've been doing this when everybody was saying, why are you even doing this? Because there's no perspective whatsoever for you to become ever a member of the European Union. And we were signing the association agreements, the CFTAs, harmonizing Georgian legislation with the European Union's acquis, and I don't know, establishing all these European standards for more or less in various policy areas and positioning ourselves as very reliable partner of the European Union for 20 years. So we've been doing it for a long time. So this is the result of that. And this did not start in 2022. And this is why I think it is a merit-based decision, and it has to be a merit-based decision. Otherwise, all this does not make sense. If these decisions are not merit-based, then all this dream of democratic transformation in the candidate countries will never happen, because they will always say, it's just a political decision. They will do it one day, or they won't do it anyway, even if we do reforms and stuff. So this has to be, we have to insist, even when we doubt, we have to insist that this is a merit-based decision, and this is a merit-based process. This is like crucial for the process.
Thank you. Do you have a question as well?
One more thing on the trio I wanted to say, because a trio is also something which is dear to my heart, and I also think it was a mistake that this trio was kind of split last year. There was no need for this, as you said. Yeah, years ago Georgia was a front runner, but we were not requesting for the trio to split. We were happy with others not being front runners. So I think it was a mistake, and we really lost 1 year with this decision. But okay, now we are where we are, and as I said, I think we're in a good place to become EU candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Bidzina, for your comments. So you did not have any question, but it's great. We can reflect as well during the panel. Yes, Madam, and then afterwards, yes. Please also briefly introduce yourself.
So my name is Christine Heger. I'm from Phoenix. And for me, it would be interesting what is happening with Saakashvili. Because I know that there are some kind of anti-democratic tendencies, but from the far away, I think the most obvious for me lack of transparency is what is happening with him, specifically as he played such an important role in the Rose Revolution 20 years ago. And yeah, so it's the anniversary. So yeah, that was my question.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Michael Roberts. I'm a Brit. So I've seen both sides of this coin and worked on enlargement from the 1990s. There is a nice euphoric feeling to this meeting and to the fact that the Commission has proposed candidate status. There is, of course, the homework to be done on 9 of the points. But of course, just to put a bit of a fly in the ointment, the EU is at the same time looking at Hungary, Poland, perhaps Poland's changed, Slovakia as a new naughty boy on the block, backsliding. And let's not go to the Netherlands just yet, but it could be the Netherlands, I agree. So we see backsliding within the EU. And I mean, we've talked about this geopolitical imperative, by which I assume we mean that if the EU doesn't step in, Russia will occupy the space instead. And that has perhaps led, as Marcel suggests, to the politics having overwhelmed, to some extent, the merit-based process that we all pay lip service to. I wonder whether the EU shouldn't sort of look more carefully at itself in this sense. I mean, the EU loves to preach, and we've done a certain amount of it already this afternoon. Georgia must do 1 to 9 points. We preach in a way that even the HRVP finds embarrassing. He doesn't like it. He urges his own staff to avoid lecturing and preaching in other countries. But we do a lot of it here. And if we're honest with ourselves, the EU isn't exactly a reliable partner in this department. If you go back a little way into history, we were unreliable as regards Turkey, both immediately before Turkey started negotiating its accession in 2003 over Northern Cyprus, and afterwards when various member states said, right, we're going to hold referendums, brackets, which means you'll never get in. And we aren't reliable in other aspects. We're a little two-faced about the issue of occupied territories, frozen conflicts, call them what you will, because I agree with everything you say about we shouldn't let this be a barrier for very good reasons. But multiple politicians across the EU who are going to say, we can't let them in because there is still this conflict that's not resolved. And any of them could mention it, could raise it at any point. Think of all the hundreds of veto points there are in this enlargement process. Then we've got the issue of the fact that we can't even raise the money or the weapons to keep Ukraine on anything other than life support. And that seems to have got much harder with letters from Mr. Orban to the Council President. France, Germany are making enlargement conditional on an extension of qualified majority voting. Well, who understands QMV outside of the Brussels bubble? And we have 5 member states who can't even recognize Kosovo, a country that's also somewhere further behind, I grant you, on the enlargement stake. So, I mean, for me, there is a strong sense in which the EU just isn't a reliable player on this board. So my question to the panel, particularly to the Georgians present, is, I mean, how does it feel to be preached at, to be lectured by the EU on what you have to do? Does it make you want to do more, or does it frankly make you want to do less? And do you actually trust the EU to keep its promises to you about enlargement?
Thank you so much for this questions and reflections. So critical reflections, but I think we need indeed to discuss also internally, like frankly, also when it comes to the managing of the expectations. And this is also one of our articles that we published at the EPC commenting on the enlargement package, that yes, there is a momentum, but of course, we also need to manage the expectations when it comes to the accession process, the timeline, that there will not be that shortcuts, that the momentum cannot be always sustained. Therefore, we need also our citizens on board and resilient societies. But this is the panel that will respond. There was one other, but perhaps we can, no, I think we should go for it. Yes, David, please. And then we come back to the panel.
Hello, Data Parlova, Political Europe. My question also concerned the issue of trust and also the question of security, because the question of security is often overlooked when we're talking about Georgia's accession to European Union, but it's more usually brought up when we're talking about Georgia's accession to NATO. Just to follow up on what was the question that was raised before, do you think the issue of trust of EU actually keeping its promise and actually pushing with Georgia's EU accession is why, to put it this way, Georgia may be kind of trying to play it safe and not kind of burn the bridges when it comes to full-on pushing and following European policies, including in the foreign relations. And this is about the criticism that Georgia is trying to appease Russia in its foreign policy by maybe not necessarily pushing on with the sanctions as the European Union does. Do you think it is? It could be one of the arguments that just by not being fully critical of Russia, given the security situation, one of the reasons for that could be that Georgia is actually afraid that you will not keep its promises. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who wants to start? So we have a few questions lining up. So we have a Saakashvili question and the state of play about his health and political situation also. Perhaps Shorena, you can help us with this.
Oh, that's a very difficult question about Saakashvili, because I will frankly say that I also don't know what's. I have no understanding what's going on, but what we definitely know that Saakashvili has committed certain things which needed somehow to be responded, but we are not sure that this kind of response and this legal process itself is responding to just and I mean the perception of justice towards him. So I mean that there are questions and about the process itself and this legal process, what's going on, whether this is in the framework of the things he has done, or this is something else, some kind of political retaliation against him. So these are actually the most important questions, because in other way, when we speak about this 20 years and revolution, I think that we missed so many chances because of misleading of the country and so many not very good decisions, or the democratic processes itself, whether they were democratic or not, but to actually discuss what's happening now. This is not good. There are so many questions we all have, and most of the society and population in Georgia have this feeling of something is wrong and this is not right how it's going on. We should be more sure about the process, about the legal aspects of this process, legal justifications of his being there, and it's certainly, yeah. So that's I don't know how articulated is my what I'm saying, but this is my more feeling about the process rather than understanding of it as such. As for the preaching, Michael, what you said, of course, nobody loves preaching, and definitely Georgian Dream does not like it, yeah? But it's the problem is not about that. This is how we approach to the communication EU is offering to Georgia. I mean, you are perceiving as a preaching, or you are perceiving as a support from your friend, as something your friend and very good, great supporter of yours is offering to you. So I think this is very important for the majority of population, and that is very well reflected in public opinion surveys. It's not preaching. This is something Georgia needs. So, and this is the most important thing for us, actually. And but I would agree that maybe, and this is the problem of this bigger crises or bigger things we have. So how we communicate, what are the means of communication? What is the, I mean, this is another thing. I think this is not you, Georgia, and even this kind of, I mean, promises. I would like to say that it's not right to pose this issue like it's keeping promises or not. I think we all understand this is difficult process. This is, EU is a community of so many countries, so many different opinions. But what Georgia needs today, this is to keep its promises, to be better, to fulfill recommendations, not for EU, but for ourselves, for our democracy. So it's a matter how we approach things and not how they are or how we, I mean, it's, I would say that, yeah, and I recall when Borrell, even in briefing, during the briefing with the Prime Minister, he said he brought the metaphor of pupil and teacher, which actually was not very well perceived in Georgia. And, but it was harmless actually. But on the other hand, that was something which was not very well perceived. And again, how we communicate, what we say, it shows how sensitive this politics and this relationship is, and how much we have to think about everything we are saying, how we express things, because it's not only about the cases itself, it's about the broader understanding of mutuality, shared values, respect, and so many other things. So not this, I try to, so this is what I wanted to say. And I don't remember the last question, if you can remind me. Trust in you. So I think what I said, yes, there is trust in you, and the trust in you is to support Georgia on this path to integration. So, and this trust is there, but it's very much reciprocal, and we also think about ourselves, whether Georgia is trustful. So, and that would be my question, my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcel, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, maybe about the case of Saakashvili first. Well, since I'm not a Georgian, I'm trying to answer that in a way how I see that as a foreign observer of Georgia. someone who has never lived with Saakashvili as a president. First and foremost, whomever you ask in Georgia about Mikhail Saakashvili, you never know what kind of answer you get. So it can reach from he was the worst evil of Georgian history, and under his authoritarian rule, Georgia was the biggest prison in the world, on the one hand, until he is the founder of the modern Georgia, and the best that could ever happen to the Georgian history. And you get the answer from totally different people, and I cannot recall which kind of answer I usually get. I think at the end of the day, it's probably 50-50. So he's a controversial figure, of course, with the reforms he has been doing after the revolution, the police reform, first and foremost, the anti-corruption. He was the founder of the modern Georgian state, for sure, when it comes to the administration, to anti-corruption, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the modernization of Georgia was more a kind of authoritarian modernization, maybe resembling countries like Singapore more. And indeed, for a while, Georgia had per capita the highest amount of people imprisoned. And that is why things are so controversial, because with the years, the way he was ruling the country became more and more authoritarian. And yeah, I think when he went back from Ukraine to Georgia, he had another assumption. He was hoping he would come back and lead the country to another popular revolution, but it didn't reflect. He was immediately put in jail, and until this day, I do not remember any major protests about Saakashvili. Even the protests we had around the so-called foreign agent law, I do not recall people calling to free Mikhail Saakashvili around these protests. And my lesson learned pretty much remembered me from our experience from Ukraine, that we as Western observers in 2012-13 were very much obsessed with the case of Yulia Tymoshenko, but we didn't really see what was actually happening in Ukraine. And when the Maidan was finally there, it was not about Yulia Tymoshenko, but about totally different things. And we were surprised to see that when she showed up on the Maidan, that it was not that much reflected by the crowd. And I would also say the same about Georgia, that the tensions within the country are not that much about the personality of Saakashvili, but about other things. So we should not be surprised that at the end of the day, if Saakashvili would show up in front of a crowd, that the crowd would maybe not react pretty much welcoming when he's coming back. So to say, he is a figure of history. We do not know about his actual conditions. That's true, because as far as I know, international observers are not allowed to see him, even not members of foreign parliaments can actually see him. There have not been so many reports about his state of health in the recent months as they have been a year ago. Actually, he became quite more active in domestic Georgian politics again. There are 2 more cases, as far as I know, still ongoing. There has been a court ruling for one of the cases so far, which means he cannot be pardoned. He can only be pardoned based on whether a ruling has already been there, but not for the other 2 things which are still pending. And I do not see that the issue of Saakashvili is pretty much reflected among the people once more. Furthermore, technically, he is a Ukrainian citizen. And to my knowledge, Ukraine never formally requested that he should be sent to Ukraine. There were political claims, but there has never been a formal request by the Ukrainian side, according to my knowledge, regarding his potential extradition to Ukraine. And if I still have a short note on the issue of trust into the EU. At the moment, there's a huge trust towards EU, but once more, we as EU should not make the mistake of promising too much to Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. The worst case that could happen is that the countries speed up their reforms and are just about to join. And then there's something happening in the EU, and the EU says no and is postponing it again and again. And then it would lead to huge frustration. And I'm here more concerned actually about Ukraine more than about Georgia, because it's Ukrainians bleeding for that, literally, and fighting for that every day. So we must be very careful with our promises, but accompanying the countries, helping the countries, and at the same time take care about our own whole task so that at the day when the countries are ready, we as European Union are also ready for the countries. That's the task, rather than placations and promises.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this points, but also for the last point regarding the expectation management and not over-promising that can backfire indeed at some point. Before giving the floor to Amanda for the last, let's say, concluding remarks from her side regarding the security questions coming from David, and also discussing the role of NATO, it's also important that concerns to Ukraine, because the EU27 is also divided, right, when it comes to understanding which come first. So can we go ahead with Ukraine's accession without having a strong security guarantees from NATO, or this can, or EU accession can go first, and then let's see what will happen with Ukraine. So it's important to discuss. But before, I also would like to make very brief comments about Saakashvili, because I feel also obliged to do so, because I know him in person. And I feel also very much sorry about the situation that he's in his health situation, psychological situation. And I remember at my times when I was younger and I was living back in Georgia, he was ardent supporter of young people. And I remember that also I was leading the Georgian Youth Parliament. He was also one of the supporters along the other, let's say, actors. And not only me, but in general, the young people was really something that he was invested in a lot. And if he also had not reformed the education system, I think me and also my peers now would not have been able to get the education, because everything was bribed. So there are, of course, good things that has been done. And of course, I'm not here to comment about the charges and about the situation, because we are not familiar of that. But of course, this is a very tragic situation from personal perspective. And I really hope that at some point we will find a political solution, and this solution should also serve. I hope that it will be soon from both sides, let's say. But of course, it was on a personal note. So apologies for that. But Amanda, please, the floor is yours regarding the security question.
Okay, maybe just a few short comments. I mean, first of all, to Georgia. I mean, Georgia needs to get its house in order. Need to stop fighting, because otherwise there's going to be another revolution. This is what you could possibly face, because Georgian citizens will at one point snap and go back into the streets. I think this is a possibility. Maybe it's a vague one, but it's still something that could potentially happen, not tomorrow, but somewhere down the line. When it comes to the issue of whether the EU is a unreliable or reliable partner, I mean, I would say that depends. On some things that are quite mundane, the EU is reliable. For example, helping strengthen resilience, delivering, for example, during the COVID pandemic, aid. When it comes to enlargement, I'm sorry to say, the EU is not a reliable partner. It has a track record now of not being reliable. I mean, somebody mentioned Turkey, which was obviously the starting point. You could say that Turkey is an extreme case, but also with the Western Balkans, it was an extremely unreliable partner, which has resulted, that's not to say that the Western Balkan countries also don't have some share of the blame, but the EU failed miserably when it came to that commitment. So I think the credibility of the EU is really at stake here. They need to demonstrate that they are committed to this next round of enlargement, and that they're really properly committed to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. That it's not just a decision that was made because of the geopolitical situation, because of Russia's full-scale invasion. They need to commit to it, and they need to deliver it. And this requires, as was mentioned, the necessary political will to carry out the internal reform, which will probably be more difficult for the EU to do than the candidate countries doing their reform, or equally so. And I'm not just going to say the EU has proved to be unreliable. NATO has also proven to be unreliable when it came to future members. Georgia obviously being the obvious case. Georgia should already be a member of NATO. And again, what happens with Ukraine vis-a-vis NATO still remains to be seen. On the issue of the geopolitical imperative, I mean, it's a nice sentence, but I mean, I think the EU still really needs to prove that it can be a serious geopolitical actor. We hear this slogan that Russia's war against Ukraine has pushed the EU to be a stronger, more geopolitical actor. But again, this is something for me that still needs to be transformed from words into action. There's still some gaps that are there. And I do believe that following through with Ukraine and Moldova is important, but also delivering to Georgia. And it shouldn't be just about Georgia. For example, the EU needs to put together a proper strategy for the South Caucasus region. It's something that they have never actually done, but this would be the moment to do it. And it's also important because of the fragmentation that we're seeing in the international order. I mean, the old order is gone forever. And there's a new order that's rising, which is full of middle powers who are playing a much more important role in the region. And I think this is reflected actually very clearly in Georgia itself. I'm not going to call China a middle power because that would be that wouldn't be right. But I mean, Georgia has developed increasingly multi-vector foreign policy in the last few years and has stronger, let's say, foreign relations with other partners. Obviously, China is there. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but also Turkey is a growing middle power, and its influence in Georgia as well, its footprint in Georgia is not insignificant. For example, now in Armenia, you have India, which is potentially going to be the main supplier of arms, or this is what we hear from the Armenian authorities. So I think we also need to take into consider that this is not just about this old world order is gone, there's new middle powers, and the EU needs to reinvigorate or regenerate itself to actually be able to operate in this new world. And I don't think we are quite there yet. We still need to go the extra length.
Thank you so much, dear Amanda. And thank you so much, dear speakers, dear Shorena, dear Marcel, dear Amanda, and also all of you for your very active participation. I think we had an excellent discussion, very frank. We did not really manage to cover everything, but it also means that we have to have another event on Georgia, because there are also much to discuss related to the narratives as well, because Shorena, you mentioned it, but we could not really elaborate about this sanctions policy as such, because there are critical voices also in Brussels about the circumvention and so on. But of course, there are not always an evidence that supports this, but we need an in-depth discussion on that. But we already discussed very interesting questions. Once again, thank you so much. Indeed, there are homework, of course, needs to be done, but as also mentioned, our participants, but also panelists. So this integration takes two, as tango takes two. Also this, we need EU and the candidate countries themselves coming together with the common efforts to make sure that we can go ahead with this integration process. And at the end of the day, I would say that, yeah, because I also hear a lot about this preaching and kind of demands and so on. But I think we also have to understand that these reforms and these conditions and these ideas and these policy proposals that we have, it's for Georgia itself, not necessarily for the EU membership. Of course, that serves, but the goal is that our country becomes more democratic, more resilient, more stronger. And then, of course, the integration is there that will come step by step. But we cannot expect that it will be in 2 or 3 or even 5 years. It takes time, and that's why we need also very strong civil society and actors and foundations to make sure that society can align with this bureaucratic process and understand that this takes time. So please join me to thank our panelists, our speakers, and I hope to see you again very soon here at the EPC, and of course follow our EPC Enlargement Task Force. And yes, once again, thank you and have a very nice evening. Thank you.